Thank you, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Watertown Board of Adjustment Thursday, March 7th, 2019 meeting. Joe, can I get a roll call?
Kays? Brink?
Here.
Dolly?
Here.
Culhane?
Here.
Darkus Johnson?
Here.
Hanson, Ford, Oletsky, and Stein are absent. We have a quorum.
Now, Jill, am I to understand that there's a change to the agenda?
Yes, number 4, the Davis signage appeal has been withdrawn for now.
Okay. So it looks like item 1 on the agenda is the approval of the February 21st, 2019 minutes. I need a motion for approval.
Motion.
I have a motion by
Second.
Brink. Second by Culhane. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Second item on the agenda is a conditional use applicant 19422.
The owner applicant is Candace Reese, and I will show you the property here. This is in the Derby Downs area. The property address is 3011 4th Avenue Northwest. The conditional use request is that the applicant seeks to operate a home daycare business from her single-family dwelling located in the R1 Single-Family Residential District per 21-1403-1 and 5, contingent upon compliance with Section 21-7001 Home Occupations, 21-7002 Home Occupation Standards, and 21-0202 2B7A through H, specific rules governing individual conditional uses. Staff finds that all public noticing has been met. A daycare home is a listed conditional use for the R1 Single Family Residential District per 21-1403 and 5, provided that such facilities shall provide not less than 35 square feet of interior floor and 50 feet of square feet of outdoor recreation space for each child. In addition, such facilities shall supply adequate off-street parking and other suitable plan for the loading and unloading of children so as not to obstruct the public streets or create other traffic or safety hazards. Per ordinance definitions, daycare is the providing of care and supervision of children and adults as a supplement to regular parental home care without transfer of legal custody or placement for adoption, with or without compensation, on a regular basis for part of a day. A daycare home is where care is provided in a dwelling and the number of children and adults cared for is subject to specific conditions and standards. The principal use of the property shall be as the primary residential dwelling for the provider, and the daycare business use shall be accessory. Conditional use approval is required prior to commencement of operation. So Reese will regularly utilize both levels of the 2,372 square foot single-family dwelling for the daycare business. The property surpasses the minimum square footage of interior floor area and fenced outdoor recreation space required for up to 12 children per City Ordinance 14031. Reese is not registered with the state. The applicant submitted the written request, site plan, and floor plans, which reflect compliance or non-compliance with the following. Section 21-0202 2B7A through H is specific rules governing individual conditional uses, and this requires that the board review such things as ingress, egress, off-street parking and loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility with the neighborhood. Also, Chapter 2170, Home Occupations and Standards. Reese has acknowledged by signature her understanding and assurance to comply with this section of the ordinance, and signage is not desired at this time, but any signage in the future must comply with 21-70028. So this board must determine if the request shows satisfactory provision and arrangement concerning Chapter 2170, Section 21-0202B7 through A through H, and chapters 21, 63, 65, and 73. If endorsed, this board may consider imposing any conditions of approval deemed necessary for this secondary use.
Thank you, Jill. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak on behalf or against, go ahead and approach the microphone, state your name. Is the applicant here? Could you come up? Go ahead and state your name for the record there.
My name is Candace Reese.
I had one question, but before, I just wanted to say thank you for the thorough letter, because this letter is really well written and demonstrates that you understand both the regulations that we have in place and also a lot of the concerns that we regularly have for home operators of daycare. So thank you for that. Addressing the hours of operation, parking, loading, fencing, signage, et cetera. The count of children, though, it states that you have some of your own children as well. And just to clarify, that max of 12 includes your own children?
Correct.
Okay.
Have you spoken with any of your neighbors about your ideas of running a home-based business?
Not with the amount of snow. I haven't really gotten to hang out with them lately.
Jill, did we receive any letters back from anybody? And Jill, there are 2 trees in the boulevard there, so we don't have to worry about that requirement.
Jill, looking at your staff's finds paragraph, you say it's fenced and you have fenced underlined. I'm just to clarify, fencing isn't a requirement for a daycare, is it? You just
Correct. That's why it's just kind of in
Okay.
italics, is because it is fenced, but it's not a requirement by our ordinance.
it's just more of a bonus for child safety and stuff, but not a requirement. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is a question that's come up repeatedly as we've reviewed these home daycares, and safety is a priority, so it's good to see that has already been addressed here. Any additional questions from the board?
Do you anticipate ever becoming state licensed and going more than 12 children or having employees?
I don't plan on doing employees. I don't foresee myself taking on more than 12 children because kids can be crazy sometimes, so I don't want to.
My wife does daycare, so I know that.
Yeah, I don't want to overload myself. Maybe something in the future. You never know what the future holds, but at this time, no.
Is there any other public comments before I close the public hearing? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve as proposed.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? The motion on the table is to approve as proposed. Jill, can I have a roll call vote?
Kays,
Aye.
Dolly,
Aye.
Dargis Johnson,
Aye.
Brink,
Aye.
Culhane.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Jill. Moving on to item 3 on the agenda, we have an applicant 19423.
Okay, this owner applicant is Michael Stewart and Walford Properties LLC. The property address is 1234 East Kemp. The conditional use request is that the applicant seeks approval for the construction of a 4-family dwelling in the R2A single-family attached residential district pursuant to 21-1804 and 21-1603-2, contingent upon compliance with 21-0202 2B7A through H, which is specific rules governing individual conditional uses. A little bit of property history. The most current in 2014, Michael Stewart, the current owner, did demo a single-family dwelling here. It's currently a bare parcel. Staff finds that all public notice requirements have been met. Previous to Stewart, property owner, demolishing the primary structure in 2014, this was a single-family dwelling property, and Walford, the purchaser, now seeks to redevelop the property with a two-story, 4-dwelling apartment building. 3 and 4 family dwellings is a listed conditional use for the R2A single-family attached residential district per 21-1603-2 and 21-1804. The applicant submitted the attached site plan, which reflects or does not reflect the following requirements of the ordinance. Section 21-0202 2B7A through H is specific rules governing individual conditional uses and requires that this board review ingress and egress, off-street parking and loading, screening, buffering, signage, refuse, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility with the neighborhood. Titles 5, 18, 21, and 24, sidewalk, trail, curb and gutter, and subdivision of land. The proposed parcel is a merger of 4 platted lots, for which a development lot agreement is required in lieu of replatting. This redevelopment will require installation of sidewalk. This board must determine if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning 210202 2B7A through H and the chapters and titles described. If application is endorsed, the board may consider conditions of approval. And just a note, we did have some contacts from adjacent landowners on this application.
Thank you, Jill. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing for this, if anybody's here to speak on behalf or against. Go ahead and state your name for the record. Thank you.
And I have a number of concerns. I don't know whether you want me to read them separately and pause and give you a chance to repeat.
Ms. Johnson, where do you live in relationship to this?
I lived to the house just to the west of the vacant lot.
Okay, so that house right there that she's pointing
Yep,
to?
just to the west. I'm 1226 East Kemp,
Thank you.
which is a single-family dwelling. And do you want me to just go through the list of concerns I have, or do you want me to stop and let you time to respond, or how?
How long is the list?
Oh, I've got 10 or 12 things.
Why don't you just state what it is that you have an objection to, and then if we have questions or clarifications, we'll ask.
So I can just go through my concerns. Okay, one of my first concerns is the effect it's going to have on the value of the properties on each side. It will be difficult to sell those properties at full value because I know when I bought my property, one of the things I told the realtor, don't even show me anything that's near an apartment building because I didn't want that. I'm also concerned about the amount of traffic that will be entering Kemp with 6 cars coming out of one area. And also, might there be extra cars that will be parking along Kemp? Because we know that a lot of times people have a lot of cars, and if you've got 3 bedrooms, you might have more cars than they're allowed for. I'm also concerned about the effect of 6 cars being parked in the back and coming into the alley. The alley is a very busy place. It's very hard to get in and get out of the garages that are there since there are so many.
Ma'am, what's that like right now with all the snow that's going on this year?
Huh?
What's the alley access with all the snow this year like?
I just drove through it a little bit ago. You can get a vehicle through it, but to get out from the garage, you cannot back into it's so narrow that you can't back into the alley to go. You have to kind of move around on your lot. It's very difficult to get into the alley. I've never seen, of course, this is a bad winter. I've never seen it as bad as this year.
One moment, ma'am. Staff, is that maintained by the city, push through that alley? Does the city push snow?
It's extremely narrow. Another concern I have is the noise that so many cars are going to be making, coming and going all times of the day, because we know that with that many people living there, it's not going to be one particular time that they're coming and going. I'm concerned about the distance the building is from the property line. It looks to me like it is very close. I thought that the minimum amount was 9 feet, but indicate on the drawing it's only 7 feet. So it's very, very close to the property line. The building design is very unattractive from Kemp. When you look at that picture, I ask you, there's been a lot of questions made on if a business is building on 212, on how it looks to 212. I asked you to look at the front of that building, and are you going to be proud to take people down Kemp and say, this is what our houses look like, this is the front? Maybe, are there any plans that will be made on the north end of the building to take, with plantings or anything that would take away the look of a warehouse or dorm? I'm really concerned. I think it's an awful looking building. I wouldn't even want to see it in the alley. How soundproof will the building be? Since it's very close to the adjoining houses, is that going to create a problem? Especially, I assume, there won't be central air, that there'll be window air conditioners, and we all know how noisy they get. And like on my house, on my property, there will be 3 of them facing right up to my house. That could be very, very noisy. Will there be commercial garbage containers, and will they be concealed? Or will they be individual garbage containers? I know in many apartments they have commercial, then nobody really takes care of sometimes getting them in the garbage container. Where will the mailboxes be located? Will they be along Kemp also to add to the unattractiveness of the property? One concern I also have is outdoor lighting, outside lighting. Will it be on 24 hours a day? Will it be on at night, all the time? And I'm also concerned about the maintaining of the outside of the building, snow removal, grass mowing, and so forth. It hasn't been maintained very well when it was an empty lot. Is it going to be maintained any better when there's a building there? One question I had on the drawing in the north and the south side of the ends of the house, there's round circles on the second drawing. It doesn't indicate what those round circles are.
Are those trees, Jill?
Tables, picnic tables.
They're picnic tables? Oh, okay. It didn't tell, and I just was very curious as to what that is. I just really think this is a awful thing to put in the neighborhood, and Watertown prides itself on having good-looking property and so forth. This does not improve anything on Camp.
Ma'am, you had stated that you were, are you talking on behalf of yourself or others?
I'm talking on behalf of myself. These are my comments that I sat down and thought about, how would this affect me? And it also applies to some other people.
I want to make one clarification. The building sits 11 foot 6 inches away from the property line. The parking spots are 7 feet away from the property line.
Building's 11?
11 foot 6 on both sides.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So the building is 11 feet 6 inches from the property line. The parking stalls are 7 feet from the property line.
So it's 11 feet from the property line.
Yes,
It
that's-
really didn't show that on the drawing. It kind of had 7.
Never mind.
Okay, okay, thank you.
It's a little hard to read on the drawing.
Yes, on the computer, I kind of blew it up several times so I could read it. My eyes aren't that good. Thank you.
Additional public comments?
My name is Eileen Wenches, and I live on 513th Street, so I'm right, on the corner house there. So that lot is in the back of my house.
Jill, which one is 513?
But, yeah.
Jill, I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
Which one is 513?
but,
That one right there?
so that lot is right to my back. And I understand Pat said that they say this is code. All of this is approved code.
All of this is, a fourplex in the R2A or R2 zoning district is a conditional use. The property in the house as is presented to the board is completely within the codes of the thing. But the issues is that they can listen to it and try to make a determination, I guess, for compatibility, for screening, buffering, fencing, garbage containers and such like that. But this isn't actually a conditional use or an allowed use within the code.
Because we as
There is no variance being requested for this property whatsoever.
landowners, we don't need to sign or anything. Because I want to talk to you about code on this lot.
No, you do
because
not need to sign anything, they don't need to sign. Their process is to go before this board and get their
Because
recommendation.
all summer, for 4 years, I've been calling on this lot, and they say it's code, everything's code. That house first was just a hole when he took out that house, that old house. It was a hole there in my backyard. And I called the city, and they said, everything's code. I go, come over here on 4th of July when I have company and tell me about code with this big hole there. All the garbage went into that hole. And they kept telling me code. For 4 years, I've called on this lot, and they said, it's code. Thistles, you know, it could do whatever. I called last year, I got the yard of the month, and I called the city and they said, and you're gonna let this lot be like that? And they tell me, code, it's code, he's fine, he's fine. You know, and I don't, you know, if this building is code, I question
Not to
whether that
interrupt,
one.
ma'am, but if the weeds and leaves were maintained and if there was no regulation by ordinance,
That was never maintained.
well, that's where the
Because
issue is.
we would have, Pat and I would have to call 6 times, and then finally someone would come and do that. That, you know,
That was an issue, but now this is a new issue and it's not really relevant to this process today.
isn't it though?
No.
Isn't,
no, it
because
isn't.
if this
So
building
you got new
is.
owners, new buildings, a whole new scenario, you're complaining about issues that may or may never arise.
I question whether if they say, because this code house is going to sit right next to us, that's an apartment building, that will be right on my backyard,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, her house is right here.
Okay,
Not
thanks,
this one,
thanks
but
for the
this one.
clarification.
Yeah. I mean, I have a small lot in the back there, and this will be right on my backyard. There will be, if that is a fourplex like with children, there is no place for a yard there.
So as Ken stated, they're not asking for a variance to the setback here. So from a standpoint of code, as far as how far it is away from the property line, you know, that's true. It's within code. The conditional use, however, is where our board comes in play to determine, is this a good fit for the neighborhood? And we can look at a number of additional criteria beyond what is setback code requirements.
Yeah,
So things like the density, which a lot of the previous concerns address, is something that we're evaluating here today.
Yeah, I'd ask you to look at that, whether that will be a good spot there in that single dwelling home area.
From your standpoint, though, ma'am, development on that lot would most likely improve the situation by cleaning it up and having something built there. Now, whether this is the right development, that's what we're here to determine today. But long term, you know, if you've had a vacant lot next to you for 4 years, I would think that you'd want something there to improve the aesthetics.
Yeah, but not a big apartment building.
Understand.
Yeah.
Can I add something else?
Yes.
Something that just came to my mind. I wish you would drive down Kemp and take a look at the houses, the residential area that you're putting this in the middle of. Last year I spent over $25,000 on the outside of my house, redoing things, repainting, new roof and everything, because our community is a proud community of how things look. I would hate to have anyone drive, if you bring anybody to Watertown that was thinking of moving here, and you drive them down there, they're going to say, my goodness, they let that happen?
Jill, do we know, are there any other duplex, fourplexes within several blocks of this area?
There is a row of duplexes that have been redeveloped south of here a few blocks.
Right there? On First?
Actually, a few blocks farther south than that, we've got a string of them that have a similar access scheme where they've got alley access for rear units and then street access for front units. I think it's to the southwest, Jill. Yeah, right there.
But I think those have garages, so.
Yeah, and there's a significant difference between those two. So density, which is a common theme here in the concerns, those units, you'll see the smaller parking places. I believe those are 1 or 2 bedroom units, and so they have a smaller parking requirement. They're single-story structures. So from a density standpoint, they're more in line with what you would see in a single-family neighborhood.
But is that R4 manufactured housing to the south of that?
It is, yes.
So they're more of a transition?
Yep.
Kenny and Jill both, in the past, since the city adopted the R2A standards, when they did the R2, and it used to be, in the old R2 zone, was duplexes and fourplexes allowed in the old R2 zone as well?
Yes, they are.
So there's no actual change to what a person can or can't be developed. It's historically been that way in Watertown. there's been no rule changes to make this happen on this lot that wasn't there before.
That's correct. It's been that way for 15 years since I've been here.
Public comment is still open. Is the applicant here?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Julianne Klukas, and we live at 1222 East Kemp. And my biggest concern is our alley, because we don't have access to parking off Kemp. Our garage is in the alley, and that's the only way we get in and out. And there currently are 15 garage doors that open into that alley in that one block. They want to add 6 more. Already, you take your life in your hands to go down that alley, especially in the winter. I can only guess what it's going to look like this spring when it all melts.
Is the alley paved, ma'am?
It is not paved. We have a lot of grandchildren that like to visit. They ride their bike over. They go to Morningside Park. They come back to play at our house. It's not going to be safe with 6 more cars. Furthermore, I don't think these are family dwellings. If you look at the plan, it looks a lot to me like what they have put up in Sioux Falls for student housing by Southeast Tech. And I think these are going to be 12 bedrooms that are rented to 12 Votechers. And that is not a good fit for our neighborhood. Thank you.
Ken or Jill, this is 4 individual, what's the 50-foot lots, or what is the existing legals?
It is, I actually have a misprint here in our staff report. The parcel is 3 platted lots, and the size is a total of 12,375 square feet, where...
So theoretically, these 3 platted are 25-foot lots.
Correct.
That if this was just combined under normal, you'd only be able to build 1 house on 3 platted 25-foot lots in the R2A?
Right.
Because it's a 50-foot minimum
Yes.
lot width. So what she was saying is that theoretically there would only be 2 off-street parking spaces on a single-family house as opposed to the 6 that they're providing here. And then the other quick follow-up question is, it's a 4-plex with 3 sleeping rooms in each one, and with the density of only being 1 person per sleeping room. Is that what the intent of the lease would be?
Correct.
I'm sorry, your name?
Chance Walford.
And Jill, for clarification on the unrelated members within an apartment complex, so we have some stipulation on the maximum number of unrelated individuals.
Not more than 3.
It's 4. Oh, that's only in the R3?
in the R2, that's only in the R2. I'll double check.
You do state on here that you are expecting it says expecting 12 tenants from May to August. Are you hoping to get students in? Is that what you're?
I'll take anybody that passes our rules and regulations. Students, families, it doesn't matter.
Are you looking at having lighting in the alley, or what were you thinking about
No.
doing for lighting?
There'll be just like a house light right next to the entrance doors, that's it. No floodlights.
There's several questions. As far as garbage, will there be like 2-yard dumpster in the alley, or what do you think?
No, there'll be individual garbage cans, and I'll probably have a concrete pad by the back steps where they sit, and George's Sanitation will pick it up. They'll look similar to the city cans, but they're black. They come from Menards.
Mailbox in the front?
Yep, the mailboxes will probably be on the front doors.
Who will be maintaining the property?
I will.
Snow retention and removal?
I do all that, and the yard work.
The intention to remove it from the property? It doesn't
Yeah.
look like there's a lot of space to...
There's not. We do haul away and stuff. We have dump trucks.
What's the value of the construction of this project?
410,000.
Have you done similar types of projects like this in Watertown?
Yes.
Have you seen property values diminish on adjoining properties based upon other projects that you've done similar to this in
No,
the city?
the property value is going to go up. It's going to look like a split level house. My 3D view I gave you guys, the reason it looks so bad is because it's 4 feet in the ground. I guess I should have spent more time and made it like an actual picture of a house. But the reason it looks so tall is because it's a split level. It's 4 feet in the ground. It's not going to be light blue with gray shakes. It's going to be midnight blue with white corners, white windows, and it's going to probably have an offset shakes up top, shake siding.
Is it street level access or is there steps going in?
There'll be 2 steps going in.
Jill, I have a question for you. There was a couple of concerns about parking on Kemp. Is there?
There will be no off-street parking on the street. We have plenty of parking spots.
Well, I see that you have enough for your guests. I was just wondering, is parking allowed on the street?
It is allowed there.
Okay.
I have enough room with the lot. I can actually have 8 more parking spots.
I have a question for Heath regarding the way the parking is displayed on the drawing. Does that meet the design standards that are typical?
I reviewed it, it does.
Are you looking with those picnic benches that you had there? That's a maybe, or that's just something that you would look at allowing to?
That's what we wanted to do, so every unit has their own space to go outside, have a picnic table, whatever.
Would that be just on grass or on cement?
Cement. So they can set their grills there, whatever, people do outside their house.
Are there any restrictions, Ken or Jill, regarding the placement of that type of things in a front yard, in a required front yard?
No.
And nothing in the rear yard either, I'm assuming?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you
Yes.
want me to clarify what we were talking about the family.
Yes, please, Jill.
Okay. The definition of family is one or more persons related by blood, marriage, or adoption, including foster children, or a group of not more than 3 persons, unless in the R3 zone, and then it's 4.
In the R2 zone, we have a rule that's 1 dwelling unit per every 2,500 square feet. And then in the R3, we have a series of rules. But in the R2A, do we have a rule that says how many dwelling units or what the minimum area is for a 4 dwelling unit?
Nope.
Okay.
What is the R2 standard for the dwelling units? 2,500?
You have that one reference and that's it.
Yeah. If this property was in the R2 zone instead of the R2A, we would require a 10,000 square foot lot to hold a fourplex, which
And
this
this one
one's
has.
12,300.
But it exceeds that one anyway, so.
Yep. Yep.
Question for staff regarding other similar Walford properties that have been developed in the city. Have we had any issues regarding construction, development, noise issues, complaints? Is anybody aware?
Nothing has come by my office anyway.
Mr. City Attorney, have we had any things to be prosecuted on any Walford properties that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Obviously, the adjacent properties don't look like they've got sidewalks, but are you putting in sidewalks?
Yeah, if the city wants us to. We were thinking about doing it anyway because eventually the city's going to make Kemp put sidewalks in, And while we got the concrete guys there, it's a couple $100 more to put the sidewalks in.
It will be a requirement of the thing, but, it might be something that we refer back to Heath, whether they want an actual sidewalk in there at this time or development, or waiver of right to protest.
That was my question.
Jill, are there trees in the boulevard with this?
Excuse me, in this case, I think the trees are pretty much gone, but they will comply.
Yep.
So with that blue line around there, is where will the parking lot start in view of, the front view of the homes where they start? Are the cars going to be out extended in front of those? I guess, what, in their front yards?
To the parking lot. The parking lots, the cars will come in and make a 90-degree turn and park sideways in there.
But that's 15 foot of
The
grass.
first parking stall will be 9.6 feet off of the property line, and this also has like a 20-foot boulevard in it too, so,
So there'll be almost 30 feet of grass.
yeah.
The plan doesn't show any screening adjacent to those parking areas. Are you proposing any screening?
Oh, I wasn't going to. I mean, we can if we have to.
You thinking screening in the front yard as long as it doesn't conflict with a clear view?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, in similar instances, we have screened adjacent to parking lots where the
Well,
headlights
because the
would,
headlights are going to be shining east and west,
yep, towards the neighboring properties, yeah.
just in the front yard or in the backyard as well.
I mean, it's a consideration we've always had when we've looked at neighboring properties where the parking places were facing a residential area.
But if there's 15 other garages in the back with lights, would 6 more really impact the need for screening in the backyard?
Yeah.
Mr. Walliford, currently that alley's unpaved. Would you be willing to sign a waiver of the right to protest? If it gets petitioned to be paved, you're not going to protest that, you'll pay your portion?
Oh, yeah, we'd pay for our 50 or 75 feet. Yep.
Okay.
Have you looked at lower density options for this lot?
Yeah, I just think it's a waste of a good location to go smaller, but
Mr. Chair.
So in the alley is going to be set up the same way, the parking you turn into you don't just park off of the alley?
nope, you gotta come in, you come in on that driveway, and then you'll turn in, you'll come in, what is it, Ken, is it 20 feet from probably the alley to the parking lot? No, everybody else was thinking there'll be 6 cars just pulling parking. It won't be like that. They'll come completely onto our property, turn into their spot.
Okay, and so for families, I mean, you've got 3 bedrooms here, so.
Yep, so I did 12 parking spots. I can do 16 or 18 parking spots. I have enough room. But for right now, we just did the minimum. We did 12, 1 for each bedroom.
And you haven't considered playground area for if you do have families in there?
There's a park a block behind there.
And are you doing central air or are you doing
No,
window?
Window AC units.
Mr. Kays, you had a comment?
I think there was, if we're done with Mr. Walford, one of the neighbors wanted to say something.
Any additional questions for Mr. Walford? Any additional things to add before?
I have one concern. Is there any possibility you might put a window in the front so it didn't look like a warehouse? And if you look at the floor plan.
It didn't work out. Actually, they're not on here, but the window AC units will be there. So they will have a white, it'll be smart trimmed around them. It'll look nice. But that's how it landed.
There
The
will be
landed
windows
on
in the front?
side. No, the AC units.
Window air conditioning, ma'am.
Yes,
So the only windows are in the bedrooms?
on the sides, correct.
Yeah, the front room and the kitchen has no windows, no nothing.
I would like to know
We didn't have enough room.
what kind of family you hope to get in here when it's just single bedrooms, a little tiny kitchen. Admit it, this is for VOTEC
It's
students.
a pretty large kitchen and living room. It's 20-some
It's for
feet long.
VOTEC students. Why don't you just admit it?
I can't be biased to any
Okay,
renters. Whoever comes and asks to rent, I have to rent to as long
We
as
need-
they follow
we
the
need to-
guidelines.
We need to move on here.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else from the public that wants to make a statement before we close the public hearing?
I'm Mike Stewart, and this is R2A. If you go down to 2 blocks south of there, maybe 3, I think it's 2nd or 3rd Avenue, there's a fourplex being built right now on that property. I want to know if they had to go through the same stuff to do that, and they actually have alley entrance garages. They take up their entire lot. They're set up property line to property line. So, where he's meeting or exceeding what your guys' or what the requirements is, and it's a 10-foot setback, he's going 11'6". That leaves bigger side yards. He's gonna have more feet in the front where a normal house wouldn't have. Yes, he's got the parking lot, but he's got more footage in the front and the back.
Ken, are you familiar with the property? They would have gone through the same process?
I don't know what their R2A is.
I need a little more, just to quote off the head, I'd have to see the property and see where it's at and what the zone was for it, so.
It's Doug Hofteaser's.
Without an address in my files, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, we did, I mean, we looked at a couple of comparable properties when we were on the satellite here a little bit ago. There are some similarities and there are some differences as well.
The height of building is going to be, Mike, do you know the height?
Roughly 12 foot out of the ground, without the peak.
To the peak, what's the height to the peak?
Probably 20.
20.
Roughly.
Comparable to what's the neighbors?
Well, like just a split for your house, is 20, 22 feet
so,
off
I mean,
the ground.
the height of the structure is going to be comparable to what we would see on the adjoining neighbors?
Yep, if I built a split for your house there, it'd be the same height as what that is. Yeah, but it would be, okay. It's, so you know where those units.
I guess into your response to trying to find that property that has, the fourplex, my contention with that is it does have garages. So the vehicles are put in. If that was a split level home, it more than likely would have a garage where the vehicles are not, being parked up front and in the back.
The other factor that comes into play is the density, so the number of bedrooms in a unit dictates the amount of parking, for instance. The way that the parking is laid out and access, so you see in those other units that we have existing here that access it, pull in, perpendicular to the road versus parallel setup that we've got here. So yeah, there's some similarities, but there are some differences, and we look at each of these properties in its unique setting to make the determination.
Yeah, but I was wondering if he had to go through the same steps for the property. He did. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
As far as the walls of the structure, I'm assuming they're going to be insulation and standard.
2x6. Yep, soundboard. They're going to be
as insulated and soundproofed as any other house.
It's going to be very decorative on the outside. It's not just going to be plain as Jane as what the drawing looks. If
the siding, lap siding, or
LP Smart Side, it'll be painted. Just your traditional colors, or the colors that are kind of hot right now.
I believe this is the lot he's talking about. It was Mr. Hofteaser. It is a little larger parcel, but it's in the same zone. And they did go through the Board of Adjustment for conditional use.
Jill, what's the address on that?
Jill, do you know if
This
that
is-
was 2 or 3 bedroom also?
This was 4 different ground floor dwelling units. It looked more like a 4-family attached. It was not stacked. So, if you recall that at all. The address is runs 1207 through 1209 3rd Avenue Southeast.
Thank you for your comments.
Well, and I know I had worked on that property too, and I know their driveways are the bare minimum off of the alley that you would have to be, and the same with the front of the 25 foot, the whatever the setback is in the alley. So really, what he's got planned, he's got a deeper driveway, so the cars are in there farther than what they would be, so they would have more room to maneuver around than what this piece of property that you guys already had proved had.
I have a question for the ladies that live on Kemp. Are your mailboxes at the street or are they on the houses?
Street.
So therefore, your mailboxes will have to be at the street. They won't be able to be on the building.
exit really shouldn't need to be used that much, except for maybe a few people who would park in the back.
Yeah, for the TV audience.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Make sure we speak into the microphone.
Sorry, well, all the addresses are facing Kemp, all 4 addresses. You can come in the front and get to all 4 units. The only purpose of the rear exit is for code, to have 2 exits, and then for the few people who will be parking in the back.
Do you have a follow-up, Rhonda?
No, my concern is the mailboxes, so you'll have,
4 mailboxes,
mailboxes.
either wherever they want us to put them, either on the building, or we can put them up front on the boulevard. On the building, they're more out of the way for snow removal and stuff, but we can put them on the boulevard. They'll be all brand new.
Thank you, Mr. Welfer. I'm going to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. The motion would be to approve the permit with the following caveats. One, that the applicant constructs a sidewalk in the front yard. 2, the applicant agrees to any planting requirements required by code. 3, the applicant works with staff to identify screening to the east and west of both the rear and front parking areas, which could be either approved fencing or tree plantings or shrubbery, whichever would be which would work best. And I would be open to other further conditions or amendments.
Mr. Case, could you include waiver right to protest paving the alley in your motion?
I would make that as a number 4.
I second.
I have a motion and a second on the table. Is there additional discussion?
The only discussion that I have is that while I understand that this is a different use than what's currently in the ordinance by code, it's an allowable use. It's a use that's been in code for many, many years. It's a use that allows for the redevelopment of unused property within the community. And while I do understand the neighborhood's concerns that it's different and it's change, being that it is a listed permitted use, somebody at some point in time in the city of Watertown, when they developed the rules and regulations, felt that this was an appropriate, generally compatible use. And that's what they did when they adopted the rules, so that's the reason I would be supporting the request.
From the board, any additional discussion? We have a motion on the table, including the caveats that Mr. Kays and Mr. Brink mentioned.
I guess the only thing is, I know the alley and I know that it's tight. Density is the only concern, I guess, that I would be throwing out there. That's, and aesthetically, like you said, this probably wasn't the best drawing that could have been presented. Without any windows to the front, I see what the ladies are saying. It does not, necessarily look residential. You're gonna have a door. That's just the way the ball bounces sometimes.
But I could build a single family house with no windows.
Right. No, I know. No, well, no, you can't because you can't sleep in it.
That's right.
No, I get it. I'm not. I'm just saying that's their concern. But the density is a little bit in that alley. That's all.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just for the point of clarity, did that motion include the requirement of installation of sidewalk upon development of the lot, or through a waiver of right to protest for the sidewalk?
Conferring with Mr. Brink, I would say that would be I'm either way, it doesn't matter. I mean, he said that they were going to build it, so I'm assuming that's what they were going to build it when they were done. Unless he has an objection to that and wants to waive it until he's required. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you for the clarity.
Thank you. With no additional discussion from the board, I'm going to go ahead and call for a roll call vote, please.
Kays.
Aye.
Brink.
Aye.
Colhane.
Yes.
Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Dolly. Motion passes.
Thank you, Jill. With item 4 being withdrawn, item 5 is open public comment participant period. If you're here to speak on something that wasn't addressed here today, now's the time to do so. Seeing none, I'm going to move on to old business. Jill?
None.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion by Brink and a second by Colhane. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Ready.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Watertown City Plan Commission Thursday, March 7th, 2019. Can I get a roll call, please?
Kays.
Here.
Brink.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Colhane.
Present.
Dargis Johnson.
Here.
Thank you, Brandy. Item 1 is invitation for public comments, participant submittal. If you'd like to speak later on, we'll have some time if you want to go ahead and sign up. Item 2 on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Need a motion?
Second.
Motion by Dargis Johnson, second by Colhane. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 3 is the approval of minutes from the February 7th, 2019 meeting.
Moved.
Have a motion by Brink. Second by Colhane. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 4 is mixed-use district discussion. Brandy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And even though this is discussion, I would still like your comments to be filtered through the chair, just so we're all not getting out of hand with their thoughts. So this is back to our February meeting. We had talked about mixed-use districts, and it's a follow-up. So if you see in your agenda packet, there is a model mixed-use district, and I sent that out for if you guys had a chance to look that over. That would just be an idea of what it could be. But I think the bigger question is, and that the 2 points that we should really answer tonight will be, do you see the mixed-use district being a new district created or retrofitted into the districts that we have, or a combination of both? And then also, like, to help you really, like, think about it, I mean, where do you envision this mixed-use district being?
I'll start because I think I mentioned it in the last meeting, based on the minutes that we read, that I think we need a standalone mixed-use development zone, overlay zone, I don't care what you call it, so that when we have a bare piece of ground that's looking at developing or something that's being retrofitted, and we wanted to try something, that we can have that to go in there. I also think it's important that we somehow meld mixed uses in other commercial zones, that opportunity. I don't think that a mixed use should be just solely all of C1 or all of C3, because there are different areas of C1 and C3 that aren't appropriate, in my mind, to have mixed use. And so I like the concept of having mixed use opportunities, either as a conditional use or something, or an overlay on top of a C3, but not the entire C3. We go out and geographically select where those areas are. Then what we end up doing is we then go through a rezoning process to create the overlay on top of that. This would be an up zone for all those individuals that own property there, because they're going to be able to do something in addition to what they can already do already. So it's not a down zone. So this would be no different than when we rezoned property up by the Masonic Temple years ago, when we actually went through, the city went out, noticed the individuals, and saying that we are going to create an overlay district on top of your property, which would allow you to use it as it is, or even decide to put housing as a mixed use or something along those lines. That would be my preference.
And that would be similar to what Aberdeen does, correct? Yeah. So, and that would be an option, to have an overlay district. And then the other one would be to implement them, like the uses that we're okay with as the residential and commercial, as a conditional use within our existing districts, and then create the new mixed-use district that would have exactly what we'd envision it being. So we would tailor it to whatever we wanted for our community, for new development, blank slates of ground, that they could utilize that and not have to go through the conditional use if we're okay with it. And I think the only value to having it as a conditional use in the existing districts is that the adjacent properties that maybe bought their lot with the idea that it was always going to be just commercial activity and no residential, then it would give them the opportunity to come to the public hearing at the conditional use hearing.
I would say that's fine on the, if we're saying it's an overlay or it's as a conditional use in the C3 district, I think it's fine on properties that aren't, if we do an overlay and you lay that over on top of the C3, and on the boundaries where the new overlay C3MU touches the C3, that's where that use could be a conditional use. But if it's a larger area in the interim, I don't think we would need to go through an extra work. Again, my intent from the very beginning is that we eliminate Board of Adjustment actions. So whatever we can do, either through special permitted uses or certain criteria, once we've made the determination as a city that property is to be zoned and those uses that are allowed within that, the time to fight that is at the adoption of the policy, not the implementation of it.
Yeah, I think that's the key too, is that we gotta put the time in up front to identify that, right?
Right.
Well, speaking of putting time in up front, I mean, on your discussion points, you have that Aberdeen, Brookings, and Mitchell all use a PUD system to do mixed uses. I mean, we have the PUD system, which would be upfront discussion. Why don't we just use that to implement mixed-use areas?
The PUD is so specific, and if they are making any changes to their plan, they have to come back to a public hearing. So it's just, if we can come up with an easier way for development to happen, we would like to see it that way.
And by eliminating the need to go through a conditional use, we will be making things move much smoother. And so if we spend a little time on the front end identifying geographic locations where this is allowed, rezoning them appropriately, then all it becomes is a perfunctory administrative process that we don't have to see it, and the city council doesn't have to see it. We've made the decision as a policy, as a community, as when we adopt that ordinance and adopt that zoning district, that this is okay here. We shouldn't have to be going in and arguing whether or not people's houses are blue or white, or businesses are on top of this or not.
And this should tie in to what we're doing with the comprehensive land use plan, where we're looking at the redevelopment of the town too, right?
Right. And I believe Luke has talked a little bit about this already within the land use plan about mixed use areas. I think it's just going out and saying that we're okay with mixed use here, whereas nothing's then, and then where we're talking about redevelopment in existing commercial zones, let's just identify those areas where we're okay with it. We do it one time and we're done.
Yep.
Right, I agree. So are you thinking that it would be a standalone district as well as, and then an overlay?
The overlay would only apply to existing
Yeah.
C3, C1, and C2 areas that we have. And then the new would be where I'm gonna go out on the Willow Creek Drive, and I'm gonna say I wanna put a mixed use out there and get that rezoned.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Luke, I can ask Luke when he comes up, but I mean, that's already a gateway overlay district and on top of a C3, so theoretically it could be another overlay on top of the.
Well, and that's already allowed in the Gateway Overlay District,
Right.
is those mixed uses.
Right.
But the thing is it's only over a certain amount of property. So we could look at extending the Gateway Overlay District, but then that kind of ruins the integrity of that district because that's
Yeah.
Right.
the gateway to the city. So
It'd probably be
it has
more a
different-
scenario where they may overlap each other, right?
Yeah. This guy, okay, so perfect example. Let's go to 14th Avenue and 19th Street. Maybe Bob Fox decides he wants to sell that property and develop the northeast corner there. What I end up doing there is I'm not gonna rezone that a C2 on the corner. I'm gonna rezone it a mixed use district on that corner, which would give me a lot more flexibility on how I design that corner.
Yep, and when we approve the zoning or the rezoning, that means we're okay with that.
Yeah.
With all of what they're proposing.
Yep. Then we're done.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't know if you guys got a chance to look at that model ordinance at all. I think that now that I have a better idea, I didn't want to spend too much time on like retrofitting it into our ordinance and how we would, and the different uses that we call out currently until I really had a solid take. I mean, you guys did express what you wanted. The overlay district is a really good addition, I think. So I think before we spend time really talking about that, let me rework it a little bit
Yeah,
and then present something to you.
I think the overlay district realistically is going to be what don't we currently allow in the certain C1, C2, and C3 areas, and say that's what kind of residential aspect we want to allow. That becomes the uses in the overlay district. The standalone district is going to be a combination again, and it could maybe be 3 standalone districts. You might have something where we want to allow, depending on the location. You know, a Bob Fox corner location is still more of a neighborhood nodal commercial development where we want a mixed use. Maybe it's a different mixed use if I'm putting that on 212 east of Stones. You might want a different type of mixed use development there. And that's,
Right. And
again, it's more work for you on the front end and more work for us on the front end. But I think once we identify that, it makes it so much more sense.
Yeah, and it's really about the different areas that you guys envision these being allowed and then what you see, what you want that to look like. And so if you want more a more of a pedestrian environment, then we'll add different walkability measures in there and setbacks, and we'll look at all those different things. So, yeah, we'll take a little more time and try to tailor one ordinance or a couple in an overlay district, and then present that to you guys, and we can pick that apart a little bit more. But I do like
think
that.
in general, though, I mean, I do like a lot of what's included in the model district that you provided us.
Yeah, and then there's small things in there that we could look at. I mean, some of the things that I had mentioned would be looking at the transparency requirement, and then off-street parking. Right now, it's in there that there is none required until it meets a certain square footage, where if that's, I mean, that seems a little more like our central business district. So if we'd want to be a little more lenient with that and have off-street parking, I think would be important, because I would imagine a, retail office on the main floor and then apartments on top, where you would need parking. And then especially if it's along, a collector route or something of that nature where it's not downtown.
Yeah, you'd want, bigger setbacks and those types of things as well.
And where we can relate and tie it into our existing ordinance for some of those requirements, would be ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. So, at least it's a starting point, and then we can
That's good.
manipulate it into what we're thinking. And I think you guys are on the right track, and I think it'll fit in there well.
Thank you, good job.
Thanks, Brandy.
Thank you all for your input.
Any additional input on that before we move on to the next one?
Nothing but praise. I thought it was really neat, and I liked reading it. And the only comment I have was the paragraph 3 of off-street parking, that try to keep it to the rear. I mean, that might be tough in practice, but
Right. That's what we had thought too. And Heath had actually marked it up, and that was one of his comments. You guys
Mr.
were
Chair.
supposed to get Heath's marks up, but you didn't.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just for point of clarity, when we're looking at, I understand from the discussion, we're looking at kind of a hybrid approach here for these mixed-use districts, one as an overlay district and then another as a standalone district of its own. And again, just for point of clarity, to help give staff direction here, would those standalone districts, I've got some concern from what I interpreted of the comments. We wouldn't necessarily want to create multiple districts of multiple use. We would want one multiple use district that would apply then as a new district in areas that would zone accordingly. I think I heard some comments in relation to a 212
I think it
corridor.
was me. What I was trying to get at is that I think a mixed-use development at different parts of town, whereas currently there's nothing there, may need a different sort of standard or standard review or even minimum requirements. If I'm placing a mixed-use development along a major arterial street versus a mixed use on a local collector street, there may be some different requirements. And so if you just have a one standalone mixed use, I'm not going to be able to plant that in that geographic location on a virgin piece of ground, as opposed to another place. And so I'm not saying it has to be a separate, but we've got to have to, built into the mixed use is that if it's locational, if it's at the intersection of a collector and an arterial, this is your standard of review or your performance standards. If it's located here, these are some maybe different things that we'd want to look at. Does that make better sense?
It does, yes. So within the standalone district, you would have some criteria set forth. Locationally determined criteria, yeah. And that does help. I think that, staff will look into that and see what kind of options could be presented. One point of thought there is, we would want to quantify that. There's 101 ways you could get into those criteria, aside from locational even for that matter. So I just wanted some clarity on how far and how deep to dig on those different criteria within that mixed use.
Excuse me, it could very well be concepts, and then we could flesh out some of those to give you a little bit more direction. I'm just knee-jerking at this point, but some of the things that I would think of if I was gonna plan a mixed-use development, boom, right on the edge of town where we don't have anything, I would wanna take a look at, well, what's the adjoining land uses, what's the adjoining zoning, what is the available infrastructure in there, what do we have for roads and streets and access. All those things would have a different level depending on where that proposed mixed use would be, is based on what's already around it. So again, if we can get it done on the front end, we don't have to come back and do a conditional use or some sort of a variance or some sort of board action. If we can at least, but now if something comes in and it doesn't meet the box, well then that's when it needs to come back and to the board. And hopefully that's enough direction. I'm not.
That and probably additionally taking a look at what we've anticipated the area of that proposed development in the comprehensive land use plan. Yep, yep.
Yeah, so it's basically going to be like we have multiple residential districts and we have multiple commercial districts, and so we'll have multiple options for the mixed use too, and then where those placements should be.
I'm not saying that you have to have a MU1, MU2, MU3. I'm saying that if you have a MU standalone district, that it needs to be flexible enough to locate it in different areas of the community, because
Okay.
An MU in what we would commonly see a C2 area will look different than an MU that you would see on a C1 or even a C3, and the requirements would be different. So you have to have that into the mixed-use district, and then it can almost dovetail back to the overlay. I've got a concept in my mind, I'm just not explaining it very well at the moment.
That does provide clarity for myself and for staff. I grasp what you're describing there, so I appreciate the clarity.
Thank you both.
Sounds good.
So next on the agenda is the downtown aesthetics discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was one of the items on our punch list, and something, that it's low-hanging fruit. Let's just take care of it now. Should be pretty easy to implement, and, we want to have the historic preservation of downtown. We talked about that last year. And so what I did is I just took the building construction requirements for the Gateway Overlay District and then just plugged it into the C1. And now there are probably some changes that could be made, but I didn't really know where to start. So I wanted your input. And if you think that that's for consistency, if that's something that we liked and wanted for our Gateway Overlay District, does that suffice for the C1 District too? And for our downtown, or do we want stricter requirements?
My preference is then, again, and I said this before at a previous board meeting, is that the limitation of prefabricated metal buildings is something I don't really encourage, at least in the main corridor of Kemp and in the ancillary streets to the east, going north and south.
And that is covered in here. It says that metal siding, lap seam metal panels, or sheet or corrugated panels, it should say are allowed as followed.
Well, it says 20% of said wall.
So, and that came from, if you remember the Trav's discussion. Right. So that would be like accent metal. And, modern construction or architecture does utilize that nicely.
Right. But if I have a 25-foot wide lot on the main street that just burned down, and I've got 20% of that street frontage, that's a lot of metal on that 25-foot street frontage lot.
Well, and that's maybe where we look at that, because the Gateway Overlay District, the commercial lots are 100 feet minimum. So in the downtown area can have a 25-foot lot. So
we go with 5% then.
And then maybe we say not on the front at all. But then again, it can be used as accent. But yeah, so a smaller amount, 5%.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to shoehorn us into, you know, having no ability to do those kind of architectural accents, right?
Things, but I think at the same time, if I'm gonna go, a 25-foot wide building, 25-foot lot, and I can build lot line to lot line, and it's got it's 20 feet tall, it's 450 feet, I can put 120, 110 feet of steel siding on it.
But
The
then
one thing
again,
I worry about limiting it too much is bullet 3 there says that there'll be no variance granted to authorize more than the 20% or 10% or whatever we change it to of any wall facing a front or side yard. And I think if we're not going to allow them to even come to us and ask for a variance, we should be opening to not shoehorning them too much.
or maybe we should just say no metal. And then if they want accents, then that would be when they would come for they would come to the Board of Adjustment for, what is that?
Variance.
Variance, sorry. I didn't know if they had specified it as something
I think
different.
to say no metal without more clarification of what you mean by no metal is kind of bad, because there's quite a bit of construction. I mean, you're basically saying you can't put up a sign with a metal, you know, it's.
No, I'm
I
thinking.
don't want to shoehorn it in that tight. I just think you're going to run into issues that's going to be in front of you a lot.
Well, I think if we can come to agreement on the frontage of the building in the C1 area where it's, all you see is frontage, it's all frontage, because it's all common walls, at least on the main drag, right?
Doesn't a transparency minimum sort of help alleviate that, or kind of force it into a accent as opposed to an entire sidewall or a large portion of the sidewall?
But we don't,
Right.
but what's the percentage of transparency?
Well, and that's what we could add into this, because that was in the model ordinance.
Yeah, because I was reading that there, there was something in the model about transparency.
I mean, I think we could probably balance it, or try to balance it a little bit. If you go to some of these places now where they're redoing or rebuilding areas that either were vacant or putting new facades on, a lot of they use sort of corrugated metal as accents. Denver, and I'm thinking of like the River North District in Denver. I was there not too long ago, and you see a lot of that. It's really neat. I mean, we're obviously not Denver, but it's not unappealing. But I understand the need to avoid sort of the pole building look.
Mm-hmm.
I think the transparency requirement would be kind of in keeping with the aesthetics downtown too. I mean, the old architecture, that was, I mean, you look at all those buildings down there and it's a pretty high percentage, right?
And maybe it's, you know, we have quite a large C1 area, and you know, and the to preclude metal in the entire C1 area might be a little bit onerous. But I think if we're going to talk about, are you talking, you know, Kemp Avenue, those historic buildings? I mean, we are technically in a historic district downtown. I think we've never actually applied historic construction standards to any of those buildings. Really? Okay, well, very good. Okay, very good. But so, well, I know steel siding is not allowed. The SHPO doesn't approve of that. But anyway, I think this is a good start. It's a good start. I think we, again, applying all of these rules or standalone rules to the entire C1, again, because we have different uses in the C1 that's.
But if they're C1, then maybe they would want to look into rezoning if they're really not a local commercial district. If they're a house, then they should probably rezone.
Well, that or that we leave them as a C1, but you know this. If you preclude metal from being utilized, that means I'm precluding myself from putting metal, and I know we can't use them for.
But then houses can't have metal anyway.
Yeah, you have quite a few metal buildings in the C1 zoning district once you get 2 blocks off of Main Street.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's my point. Is like I don't think we can just whitewash the whole thing. You're going to have to be a little bit surgical in how you apply that standard. Otherwise, we're creating more work, which I think the 5 of us have decided we really don't want to see. So we have to, again, let's make our policy right on the front end.
Sounds good. So then, would we still include this in the C1 district, but then just specify that these building construction requirements are only for properties adjacent to Kemp Avenue, Broadway, Maple,
Well,
within the C1 district.
there would be one way to do it, or you could actually we could just put a map on and just identify them so that we can see them as opposed to describing them. I would just make a map as a reference.
Oh, yeah. And that will be, I mean, similar to what we have the downtown parking map already.
It's not very hard. We can all visualize where it is. I think, when they did the charrette and they did their walk around, I think some of those types of things were all identified in the Uptown charrette.
Mr. Chairman, one question, maybe more for staff. Do we have a current, I don't believe we do, we don't currently have a defined downtown district boundary of sorts?
We still have the old former Urban Renewal Board URB district. I mean, but that's not really, you're not taxing anymore, but it's not, and we have a zoning district, which the old C1 followed much of the old URB district, correct?
And we do have
So-
a defined historical district too.
Maybe we would have an overlay district for those areas similar, and just create a different one like we have for Gateway Overlay.
You're not messing with your uses, and all you're talking about is just what's the design standards for this geographic area? What do you think, Luke?
Luke Muller, First District Association of Local Governments. Thank you.
Hi, Luke.
The question why I sat up here a second ago was that there's two ways I typically see that happen. One, overlay district, draw the box, and here's the 1, 2, 3 things we care about in this overlay district that's different than the other. You get that point. The other one I've seen in other cases is that they will just say, I see it for setbacks often as well, where they'll say, on these roads you can be a 0 setback, but on these you can't. On these roads you can't have steel siding, but on these you can. That would be the other way you could do it in the standalones, in the existing C1. However, I do think that would be trickier because you're not going to do that for the full 4 blocks of Broadway or something like that. So I think that would be trickier. I think you're probably going to be doubling back to historic district or urban renewal for an overlay.
And if we draw the box, I want to make sure that we don't make non-conforming uses at the front ends that we have to address later.
Yep.
So as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that the overlay district sounds better.
I agree.
Is that where you're leaning to?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's where my question was leaning towards, is if we had that already existing. It sounds like we don't necessarily to the boundary that we would want to have in this case, but create a downtown aesthetics overlay district that wouldn't apply to the entire C1 zone, but just to that physical geographical area.
I think that's a good plan.
Yep. I agree. We'll look into that and get you guys something. Yeah, hopefully, we can try to finish some of these items up. If we get you something next meeting, and then potentially have it for public hearing and action the following.
You're real close. We're real close on that one. I really think we are.
Yeah.
The only other thing I did want to touch on, and it's in here at 108, is the maximum setbacks. I think that that's an interesting idea because of recent development. It's certainly better than what was there before, but I don't think it really lends itself to the way that our downtown should look or looks. And our hands were tied, I think, at that point, in that particular instance.
So you would like to see that it would be more 0 property line oriented, and then to say that you can only go back 5 feet off the property line?
Well, something like that. The way it's written and drafted is actually kind of neat. I'm 108.2 A, B, C, or A through D. I kind of like the way that it's written. But that would alleviate sort of the issue that we saw with that particular, one of the issues that we saw with it. Because what happens is that when you back it off of the street, you create a break for pedestrians. The flow doesn't work. You can't walk up and down it anymore, and I think it becomes less safe. I mean, I think that's, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think it becomes less safe just because it's no longer the tall buildings, psychologically you're inclined to move faster on the street when you're driving on it, I think. more open space, more sort of a raceway as opposed to the pedestrian or what we should be aiming for, a pedestrian-friendly downtown.
Right. Yeah, and that sense of enclosure is more comfortable for pedestrians to utilize the space. Sounds good. Because you guys wouldn't want to see something for action the next meeting.
You got it all ready to go and it's perfect, we can do it.
You know us.
I know you can.
All right, we'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandy.
Item 6 on the agenda is comprehensive land use meeting number 5.
All right, so Luke's gonna take over, and looks like he has 15 minutes.
I'll figure out a way to make it go longer, Brandy. Don't worry. We do have one of what I'm going to expect to be 2 more meetings is what I'm planning, just as a work session meeting. This is going to be a brief one, so I will get to it. We have basically 2.5 topics to talk about in the next couple of weeks. The one part, though we're not going to talk about it at this point because we've talked about it a lot, is the the future land use map of the existing part of town in which we identified potentially some new zoning districts. I only bring that up. I want you to make sure you familiarize yourself with that table that is within there, as well as the map itself, because some of that includes some of your discussion you already had on mixed uses, such as office district, which I anticipate on being something that's relatively important for town, which would take care of some of that, as well as adding another sort of a regional commercial, kind of splitting up the highway commercial district into a couple of things. That may help. Moving on to what I want to talk about today, I am going to focus the time on the major street plan and focus on that today. Yeah, would you please bring that up? We met with staff. Staff and I met to discuss some of the conversation we had when we did talk about the street plan earlier, and just some recent developments we've got going on in the area, and realizing that what we have been hoping would happen hasn't happened in some cases, and let's take a realistic look at least on the fringe or the existing part of town here, just on the nearest part that we expect to be imminent in the next decade or so. And so a couple of changes were made from the existing draft that I wanted to point out, and one of them is kind of it's a bit of a change in dynamic or a paradigm shift a little bit as far as how we've handled it, and it's more to open the door to do it. And here's what I mean. If you look on the, I'm going to invite you to take a look at the fringe of town, some of this part that we're starting to develop and see developing. Take this, for example. You recall that typically we have our minor collectors shown on what I would call the quarter line, splits down the middle of the section, but we've missed some of them as we go out there. And at this point, we're at a point where we're going to need to have north-south connection on the east edge of town, period. Right now, we've got anywhere from 9,000 to 4,000 vehicle trips a day going on, or vehicles per day going on 19th, depending on where you're at. And we only have half of it developed right now. The east half still is to go. And without a north-south corridor, we're going to have some. Bottom line is, we're going to have some north-south. We have the idea there is a street planned through a planned development at this point. You got to figure out how to get that north. The idea was, rather than put that on run that through the middle of the section, maybe they go on the 80 line instead. Have two what we would call minor collectors instead of one minor collector. That concept is not necessarily a new concept in terms of planning, though it is new here. The best way I can think of it to describe it is you see these especially in residential developments a lot, but you also see it in commercial developments, where you may have that collector street that takes me from this development to that development, and those developments onto the commercial area. This minor collector scenario where you run one right through the heart of it, from this development to that one is something you see regularly in subdivisions, and I use examples of San Diego Avenue and in Sioux Falls or La Quinta or some of those that go from one development to the next. Yes, you do have some houses on those, but they're limited in the amount of them, and it goes through them. It cuts through that area. That's what this is planned for, to cut through some of those existing developments. And as we go to the outside, yes, we want to strive to have a collector going down the middle of the this middle of the section. However, if it seems more appropriate to have maybe a minor collector going straight through, connecting to both of them, we'd have that option, leave that door open. That's really what that's amounted to. So what we did is we looked at, okay, we've got some streets that are already serving that purpose anyway. And the idea is we probably ought to call a spade in some of those instances. And one of those that we mentioned was, well, of course, the idea of this that would come through future developments, but also an 18th. As we see, and one of the reasons, and I don't know how your mental map of that area is, but Northridge development did not go all the way up to the quarter line in that case. So we have a narrow strip. We've got about a 100-foot wide strip on that north edge that is left, hasn't been done. Could probably argue that that might have been because of the idea of avoiding a collector. But the fact of the matter is it's highly unlikely that we're going to see a collector go right on that quarter line anyway. We do have crossing already at both sides on 18th Street. It actually, the way that those roads, the way it is oriented going through Northridge is actually oriented quite well for that sort of thing. So that's a good example of how you do it. It goes through, we've already got plans to connect, and there was talk back when the Wellness Center had gone on about pulling that all the way across to 19th anyway. And then you actually follow, there's an existing tree belt that lines up about even with that as you go over into Bob Fox's as well. So bottom line is that makes sense. That makes more sense than planning that if you move that to the north, one, we already have development that's causing a problem. If you head east, you're already talking about some existing uses that are going to have to move the farther you go. There's a tricky part to that is that would connect up to 19th Street, or 19th Avenue, sorry. 18th would have to connect up to 19th Avenue within Valley View because we have to go around Jefferson School. However, we do have some property in there that we can work around as we get to it. So bottom line is that's an example of one of those, oftentimes in other communities they call them local collectors is what they'll call them. It's vernacular. Minor collector, local collector, it's very similar is what it amounts to. So that's the paradigm change.
Other communities aren't necessarily laid out on such a strict grid like we are either. I mean, especially when you start getting into communities that have more trees and things, you see more of that natural kind of progression.
One of the issues that was brought up, and I think that you can empathize with this as a board, I know the engineers talked about this, is that, you've lived it. It takes us, generally speaking, about 20 years to develop a quarter section. And by the time the plan starts, frankly, the town has developed their own traffic grid, the way that they're handling it. The bottom line is, because we've got more things going on, we don't grow out to those roads. They just don't happen. We don't build that quarter line road that turns out to be the last road built. And frankly, we've already established our traffic pattern at that point. And that's on purpose, I'm sure, to a degree by some of the developers to defray some of that cost. I can't blame them. But the bottom line is that that's a way to try to keep it so that we're keeping our road grid up for the town as we're growing to it, not constantly playing catch up with that system. So gives us that option. The other point that we brought up in there is that where we do have these minor collectors and these streets listed, we talked about it would probably be wise, and I'm hoping that you'll support this as well, that within the strategies of the street planning that we would point out that in order to approve a a subdivision in a location that shows a collector that doesn't have a collector, before we do that, we have to amend the land use plan.
No, I think that's really good.
That way
I want it to be extremely explicit.
Yeah, basically, you know, it's sewer and roads is what dictates how a community develops, because we can get water and gas anywhere. But so it's really important that we're laying out, if we're not going out and laying out pre-identified sewer service areas, then the best way for us to manage growth is by streets and how they're laid out.
I'll stop and let a little more comment come here in a second, but I want to point to just one other thing that came back in and one other thing that I know is going to have to be changed here from this draft, and just that I wanted to point out it will. One, North Bypass connector comes back in here. If you see previous drafts, it wasn't in there. There's just some discussion about having it out for a while. The idea to keep that in there as an option, it's been there for over 60 years in our land use plans, and honestly, it's probably a good idea to keep it in there. The other part is that this stretch here that was talked about as being a minor arterial would be changed back to, it'd probably stay as a minor arterial in there. The other one that I was going to point out is this minor collector through subdivision down here. This is the industrial park. I think you've annexed that. That's going to go away. That's going to be a local system into there. So that could go away with that being industrial. With that, I'll back away from that part. There's another part about taxonomy that I want to talk about for a moment, but is there anything in here, if anyone has any comments and want to talk about here with regards to where things are, where roads are, what about this, that, the other portion of town?
I think it's important that along, 31st and then the 80 line between 3rd Avenue and 14th Avenue, we have two options there. One for a major collector and one for a minor collector. Is that the way I read that?
Those two are shown as two minor collectors between 31st and 19th.
Are you able to zoom in on that?
But 31st itself, that even though it's not there, is a major collector.
Yes, 31st would be a major collector.
I think what's important is because 31st may never get built just due to the topography of that area. So the minor collector that you have on the 80 line to the west is more likely to be developed. And that theoretically could be changed to a major collector, just that portion of it at one point in time, because the way that ground lays north of 3rd Avenue over where Gene Mack's old property used to be and lays, there's no incentive to build a major collector there because you're not going to be able to get any access to it from a commercial standpoint. And so it's really, I think it's great we leave them both on there, but we should, really be cognizant that it's probably the blue line to the west that's going to be the major collector for that section. I'm not a transportation engineer, but
as we noted in here, the two, just in reference to that, this is the stretch in here shows as a minor collector that goes to the west of that as well. That connects into Eastwood's addition, coming down to the south, working down to what's 3rd Avenue into there. Fact of the matter is there needs to be a vein that runs up into that and gets traffic down so they don't all have to go back to 19th before they go to that end. As Commissioner Kazin mentioned, reality may dictate, if not forever, at least forever, for a very long time. For a very long time, the minor collector shown immediately west of 31st Street will likely be the edge of our street grid for many years.
Realistically, we realize that the 4 sections where we're going to see the next development in the next 60 years are those 2 sections east of 19th Street, north and south of 3rd Avenue, and the 2 sections north of 14th Avenue, east and west of 81. And that's where we at. So that's why we really have to be sure of where the transportation system is going to be, because that's where we will see 85 to 90% of our growth in the next 60 years.
Hey, Luke, can we go just a little bit farther south from there, where we tie into the Willow Creek Road?
Correct.
And we've got that jogging over then to tie in on the major collector,
Yes, down here.
to the east of there.
Oh, over here.
Yeah, so it comes down, then it jogs back over and ties in. That's how we see that development coming along.
You've got. Are you talking the portion to the west? Is that what you're talking about? Right here, where my
Right
hand
where
is.
the mouse is at.
Yeah. Yep. That's planned at this point already, isn't it? Isn't that master planned at this time? Okay.
Yeah.
If 31st goes away, which as of now they're saying, yeah. Gotcha.
So the portion that's coming over to the east, though,
No, he's talking about.
coming east of there over towards McDonald's.
Yes.
Do we really see that being developed there?
Realistically, it's probably the best option if you were really thinking about it long range, is to have that connector go up and pick up 31st and not worry about having 31st dumping back then down onto Willow Creek Drive.
Yeah.
If everything was to work out the best when you can negotiate something with the landowners, and then that way you could take that straight down. You know, to me, it's a better fit because you're going to be going right past the Redland Arts Center, which then takes you down.
I like the fit too. I'm not seeing a lot of development there driving that in advance of the road, right? So you're going to see the development further to the west first.
Yeah. Right. And that's why we go back to the standpoint of phase 1 development, phase 2. I mean, the bottom line is we're going to have to bring them back to the west first.
Yep.
It'll start to come east. I also want to point out, I mean, it's a major street plan. I'm not saying that's how that's going to go through there. I mean, in reality, could it come up to the service road? Yeah, it certainly could. But this just followed some property lines. That also assumes that a given property owner is willing to split his property right down the middle. So, I mean, some alignment, but we have in the past had indication that if 31st goes away, the next traffic spacing warrants, at least as of about 6 or 7 years ago, traffic spacing at 33rd could possibly have a stoplight at, whereas nowhere else on there could. That may change, but
yeah.
And again, you know, we have a gravel pit out there that's going to be out there for a long time, and so we may never see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still something to probably keep on the books. You might.
Realistically, as was just noted, that need really becomes more important as that gravel pit goes away.
Yeah.
And so we've really just, as a community, we've got to be responsible and think about how on earth are we going to do this in the future? Are we going to push them back to 41st and Louise, or are we going to find another way? You know, so that's the bottom line. Any other areas you want to look at on here and make sure a pet project is on there?
Sarah Karen, Mayor. One thing, I don't know if we've talked about this, but I want to make sure that we're coordinating this major street plan with the future development maps that we include. I think we should be utilizing this when it's done. If we have areas that want to develop that are outside of the area that we think is appropriate for development, are we going to be prepared to say no, push it in, or are we going to amend the plan, or what's the thinking?
Well, my preference would be that if we stick to the plan, unless there's a good reason to change it.
Right. So we need to think through this very carefully, and I think that the southerly interchange will come in the next 10 years, and I think we need to show that's an area that's developable. Otherwise, we're putting a road in outside of our area, and we don't have that map handy, but you showing it on here, and I just can't remember if this area here shows development around it in the future, because it won't happen if there's, it's going to be warranted, I believe, by the development that's occurring. And
For what it's worth, the
After 2025 is what the plan states right now, that we don't foresee anything happening for.
well, that's only 10 years from now, less than 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's my point is, I think that's within 10 years. And I think we want to show development at the same time within 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's my intent, and I'm hoping that as a community, we get this thing wrapped up now, because in 2022, when new census information and new growth data comes in, well, there'll be time for a minor update, and that's probably where the good time would be to look at that development on that road. I think 10 years is optimistic. Brookings just went with a southern interchange. It was turned down last year by the feds. They're going back in this year. For us to get that, we need 25,000 cars by FHWA standards to get another interchange down south. And so we're probably.
You can put me on the record.
I
think it will be warranted.
I think we need to, but I think it's 20 or 25 years before we get an interchange.
And
based
maybe
upon
because
funding.
of DOT restrictions, but
Yeah.
as a community,
Yeah.
if we want that to direct growth there, where we're putting our new industrial park, and we're putting our largest employer,
Yep.
which lots of traffic.
Yep.
We want to be able to expand that area, and we don't want to be, well, our comp plan says this won't develop for more than 20 years, and there's demand right now.
No, that's not what I'm saying, Madam Mayor. I'm just saying I don't think you'll see an interchange for 20
No,
years.
I know, I heard that part, and you might be right about that, but what I'm saying is a little different. It will be warranted,
Yes.
whether it's
Yeah.
built or not.
Yeah.
We'll be needing it, and there will be demand for growth around that area, not residential, but, industrial. We're trying to plan for that now, for sewer and, that kind of infrastructure. So, and let's not show roads on here we think we're never going to build. I don't think we should take them off if we really don't think that that's buildable, and it's never going to have a demand. And it's got a floodplain, it's got steep slopes, it's got.
Well, maybe it's not. Maybe that's not the general location, but maybe it's that we reserve a major collector somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
And
Well,
if
I
a
think
major
we should.
If a major collector can't be constructed, then you have a minor collector as a backup.
Right,
don't
but I think
you're
we need
locked
to go
into it.
farther than that. You mentioned, and you have knowledge that you don't think that's going to happen. I don't want to show it then. It should be the alternate, not the primary.
I don't want this to be the Todd Case plan either, though. I'm just
No,
saying
I
what
agree
think.
with you though, Todd. I agree with you because I've looked at that area too. It's steep sloped, it's floodplain, it's not going to have any potential for commercial, and we're showing it as our major route. That's not realistic. This is not a plan that's realistic, and I think it should be what we really think is going to happen, not just lines on paper. And that's good information that you have. So, and when we adopt this map, it should have the most up-to-date street plan on it and zoning and, the city limits. Right.
all of the maps have to have
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yep.
Let's not show
Well,
10-year-old.
This has been a 3-year-old project,
know.
and so we're waiting, or 5, I guess Luke
Right.
says. And so I know that we're trying to make sure that rather than have to do them again, spend a week. We want to.
And this area down here with I can't honestly say I was thinking about it when I looked at that map. We weren't thinking about the major street plan when we were looking at the future growth areas. So I just want to double check that.
Ray, can you put the camera on here? I've got that map here.
And does this
We've got the
route,
north side, not
does
the,
this route match that of our transportation study?
that was the main one that was the one that was ultimately,
Okay.
that was option 1.
Okay.
Is what it was. So the area we're talking about is, come here, microphone. The area we're talking about is, if you were looking at it, it came through, kind of snaked its way through here and down into this area here to come up for an interchange. Right now, it's shown as industrial development in this stretch here, north of a road that I'll get in. I've spent a lot of time on at the county level, but bottom line is to the north side of that is proposed for development not until after 2025, which I think time frame wise probably tracks with with what we're talking about here. I think the question that the mayor's talking about is perhaps
Yeah, we're
somewhere
showing
in
that as rural, right?
standpoint,
Not developing
maybe
at all.
going to the other side, taking that 80 to the south as well.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because the road is not going to be supported by,
Yeah.
and you don't want a road through a field, a major road that costs millions of dollars to build with no potential use along the side of it. That the building of that road will open it up for development. That's what we
Yeah.
want.
So from a staging, would you look at that probably in the 25 to 30 area, Luke, then?
That's exactly what I was thinking is
20 to 25 for that side, plus we'll go the other side and then drop that down to a 25 to 30. And then
yes.
everything still beyond that would be after 30 sometime.
That's where I saw that too, was
I think that's too far out. I don't think we want to show in our comp plan. If we think we're going to suffer through a non-functional freeway interchange at 212 for 25 or 30 years, I think that's asking our community for too much pain.
well, this just goes 6 to 10 is what this would be. You're not talking 20 to 25 years
Oh,
out,
the year
right?
20.
The year.
The
Yeah.
year.
Year.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I thought,
25
oh my
years
God.
from now. Okay, I got it. It's the year 2025.
Yeah, 9
Yeah.
to 12 years
Yes,
probably.
yes. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as soon as Terex opens, we're going to start feeling it. And there's going to be pressure on, the DOT is already anticipating it as well, I think.
You're talking
right,
about this
Jeff?
stretch right here.
We
Right
have a
there,
DOT
Mayor, right?
rep.
You're talking about this stretch right here. We're going to feel the pressure
Yes.
at that area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that those points that the mayor made dovetail nicely into what the next phase of our discussion will be. Your homework for next time is to get familiar with this map that I had on there, the phasing map as well as the uses on the outside edge. I don't normally we take a lot of time on that, and guess what we have? It's just that it was several years ago. Okay, so what I'm really asking you to do is take a look at it, see what things have changed. I already know that there are a couple of them that will. For example, the lakes at Willow Creek, or I don't recall what that is called, but that is shown on there as industrial. That's not all going to be industrial. So that it was also envisioned that would stay mined for many years. It's not going to be mined for many years. It's going to be subdivided. So there are a couple of those I already know we'll have to make some changes on, but if there are some areas that you think need to be changed, as the mayor mentioned, let's go ahead and get those on there at this point.
Luke, what do you see as the timeline moving forward?
What I see going on is that I anticipate that we're going to have these work sessions wrapped up in 2 weeks. At our next meeting, that'll be the last one. That's what I anticipate. After that, then I'm going to have to go back and do some edits from what we've talked about. You've made some motions to throw some things on, some bullet points, as well as, and primarily, I like making maps. I like having maps in a part of a thing. The problem is that, as the mayor mentioned, there are some things that change over 5 years, and so I've got to update some things on the maps. Not the least of which is to update road systems like Kemp Avenue or First Avenue going into Kemp needs to be on the maps, as well as just updating city limits and other things. So bottom line is what I see is probably about a 6-week process before we get to public hearings for me to update the draft itself. But I'm really hoping that I'm circling in pencil your early meeting in May to hold a public hearing on land use plan and go through the adoption process at that point. That's what I've got circled now. I hope it works that way.
Okay. Thank you, Luke. I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. It's been a long process, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
In regards to the transportation mapping, I don't know if Luke was going to expand on this any or not, but I just wanted to touch base briefly. First of all, and inform the Planning Commission, we have applied for a grant for an updated long-range transportation plan, or a transportation master plan, otherwise known as, through the DOT's SRP funding that they offer. That application was due last Friday. We should hear back within the next month, maybe 2 at most, whether we're successful in that grant. The current transportation master plan that we have on hand was completed back in 2005, but with the completion of an updated comp plan and with the completion of our pavement management system study back in 2017, those 3 documents together, transportation related, will work well. I think it's a great time to apply for and hopefully accomplish the completion of an updated master plan. In relation to that, some comments that we've had internally with staff and we relayed to Luke is the correlation of those 3 plans in relation to the transportation map. And in discussions with that, initially at first glance, it sure seems to make sense that those 3 maps almost match and are in some ways identical, or a lot of ways identical, as far as what each street is being called, as far as the classification of that road. And then we've also, through our discussions, recognized there are pretty unique functions that each one of those maps are created for. The functional classification map is really essentially to determine whether a roadway is eligible for federal funding that's managed through the DOT. And that functional classification map is created in collaboration with the DOT and municipal, local staff that give input on that. And in some ways, I would say is a little bit wider of a brush stroke of what we call things so that they are or are not eligible for federal funding. And then you get down to our comp plan map, the major street plan, that's required for municipality to have under state statute, and that we do have and we create and we include in our comprehensive land use plan. That one and the transportation master plan, I think, dive a little deeper into the technical details of what a road should be classified as and probably have a little more implication and impact on how the community develops and how certain developments would then be required to build to certain standards depending on what those plans are showing, where these lines are drawn, what those roads on those lines through those development mean, and the regulations that we would then administer to those developers to give us collector level status of roadway, arterial level status of roadway, or local level status of roadways, which is very impactful on those developments because that regulates the right-of-way widths, the street, the physical construction design, the cross-section of the road, access control, and all those measures. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that briefly and kind of just present that information. What Luke, I believe, was anticipating doing was getting this major street plan to match with the language as far as how things are classified closely to what that functional classification map is. We did notice a couple of streets on the functional classification map that were maybe rated higher than what a transportation engineer would call them, which again, the main downside for that is it could have implications for development along that corridor that we maybe wouldn't want to administer because they're a little too egregious because the road's maybe not classified that high. So that's where I go back to my reference of that functional classification being a little bit wider of a brush stroke and calling it what it is. So there might be a few roads that we don't directly match what the functional classification map says, but for the most part I think that it will be fairly identical. And all that being said, we will wait and see whether the Transportation Master Plan grant gets approved and move forward with the completion of that. And on that particular topic, I will share my thoughts briefly here. In 2005, this study didn't provide as detailed of information as I'm used to seeing on a long-range transportation plan in regards to future expansion and growth of the roadway network. It kind of gave a it gave a snapshot of the functional classification map that existed back in 2005. And it then went into targeted studies of certain projects, of expansion projects like the South Corridor or South Bypass that was constructed. Willow Creek Drive, I think, was another one that was in there that's been constructed. And then it also touched on the Northern Bypass, which of course has not been constructed yet. But one thing I would hope to get out of our new transportation plan is a map that anticipates the classification of these roadways as they expand and grow, and you have a 10, 25, 50-year projection of what that roadway network looks like. And that is then established by a licensed professional engineer that's a traffic transportation expert, and really helps be one of those driving documents to help support this major road plan. So, long story short, that's what I'm getting at. These three things really do work well to work together, intertwine, and are meshed in their functions, but yet are all kind of a little bit unique too in their own way. So,
Timing on when, if funding comes together, the study itself is at about 1.5 years before we're seeing something completed?
yeah, the initiation of the study would begin this July or August, according to the application information, and would take approximately 1 year to complete. So you're looking roughly 1.5 years.
Which, if something comes out of that, then we can come back and amend our comp plan if we need to.
Yeah.
Is that something we would take out for bid with the grant money, or is that working with the DOT?
That's a good question, Mr. Chairman. The DOT would manage that project completely and pay for it entirely until it's completed, and the city would reimburse them our share of what we went into an agreement with them initially before the project started.
Okay.
The program requires a minimum 20% participation locally. In our grant application, we indicated a 25% level of local participation just to try to help foster the grant approval.
Sounds good. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
thank you.
Main thing I would point out with regards to what we'd talked about as far as functional class versus matching this is that the places you would see some of those streets not match is going to be in the developed part of town, as in the part that I would call the home grid, just from a standpoint of the classification of them. On the fringe, they're largely going to match up pretty closely.
Thanks, Luke. Any additions on item 6 before we move on? Go on to open public comments. See none. New business.
One thing, it's not necessarily new business, but this is a sidebar. I wear another hat in my professional life as the director of the First Planning District, and that Luke Muller and myself and members of the South Dakota Planners Association will be contacting the South Dakota Municipal League here in the next couple weeks about putting on some training in conjunction with the South Dakota Municipal League Annual Convention in Aberdeen this fall. And if there is something that you think that you would like to see presented at that convention, we would be more than glad to pass it on to Yvonne at South Dakota Municipal League. We're doing some training next week with the County Commissioners Association in Pierre, where we're providing 3 hours of training, a group of planners on a wide variety of county-based issues. And so we're going to be doing the same thing, hopefully, with Municipal League this fall. And so we're going to be looking for topics for conversation.
And for reference, we commandeered an afternoon with the county commissioners conference here, and the idea was maybe you can't always get out to wherever it is we hold our planners conference. Let's maybe have at least one more shot to take it, and also to focus on municipal for one and county for the other. And so that's the hope. So if you do come up with something, you can let staff know. You can let your the South Dakota Planners Association Secretary Treasurer, who's sitting to my left here, you could let her know just as easily as you could me or Todd.
Sounds good. I made a note here, so if I think of anything. Any additional new business?
None that I have.
Old business?
Nope.
Executive session?
Nope.
Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Colhane.
Second.
Second by Brink. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
Thank you.